Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
Hello everybody. My presentation is in one of the application area of machine learning, namely forensic linguistic. So here the problem at hand is how to identify author. So basic idea is, can we identify author from their write-up, and the write-up is available in the printed form and not in the handwriting. So the problem is a very old problem, and it was earlier applied to resolve the dispute that were appeared in the literature and the write-ups, and recently the focus is shifted to email and blogs. There are a lot of places where people write anonymous blog, and the idea is to, can we identify those people from their write-up trends. So the problem formulation is very simple. Given a n text document d1 to dn and m authors a1 to am, can we find a mapping from d to a? So it turns out to be a multi-class classification problem, but it differs from traditional text document classification problem. More on this in the later slide. And the cardinality of A is m plus 1, so we also cater for the situation where the document can come from an author which is not there in our list, so for unknown. So the assumption is that the analysis is based on the handwriting, and the training data and test data are from the same language and preferably English. So next is the feature space. So it may happen that a author can write articles on sports as well as on entertainment, and similarly multiple authors can write an article on sports. So traditional document classification, which much rely on the underlying words, basically characterize the topic and doesn't characterize the author who has written that document. So traditional document classification features, which are a word, cannot be used for this author classification problem. So basically they try to capture the underlying topic in the document, not the author. So the idea is to, how can we identify the author then? So it turns out that style is a predominant feature in author identification. So basic idea is to capture the writing style of the author, not the content that has been written. So to start with the features are the character features, where the idea is to find the character and n-grams and the character type distributions, like the ratio of the capital letter to the small letter and things like that, and other formatting character. So this is very low level features and which doesn't require much language knowledge. So it can be applied for any language without understanding the word of the language and other things. Next is the lexical features, which is basically talks about the length distribution in terms of word length and sentence length distribution. Those sentence and distributions appears to be a very promising character, but in reality it doesn't work much. So it's not a very reliable feature as far as literature goes. Another very reliable feature is the function or frequent word distribution. So function and frequent word distributions are basically stop word distribution, which are not used much in the topic as well as information retrieval community, but they are very close set of words, and they are found to be very useful in case of author classification. Third measure is the vocabulary richness measure. So here the idea is to that some people use a lot of repetitive words. So in their write-up they use a lot of repetition of the words. Some people do not repeat words. So to capture this kind of thing. Fourth is the rare word distribution. So this is basically try to find out that some people uses certain words which doesn't appear in the top maybe 20,000 frequent 20,000 words of the English language. So those are the words that are classified as rare words. And then sometimes sentiment polarity also helps. So either is a positive swing or the negative swing. As far as syntactic feature goes, parts of speech distribution and the n-gram on the parts of speech distribution turns out to be a very useful feature. So people have tried up to bigram, not gone for trigram in terms of parts of speech, because they are quite independent of the word and they try to capture the structure of the sentence in certain sense. which is the basic idea behind the author identification, because the idea is to capture their writing style. Error also turns out to be a very useful feature, especially collocation error, where English and non-English speaker generally tends to use different kind of prepositions. They do a lot of mistakes. Non-English speaker especially do a lot of mistakes while using prepositions and all. And the last one is the application specific character. These are basically formatting characters. So next is the learning strategy. So a lot of focus was given on the feature space itself, and not much work has been done on the learning phase. So people generally uses off-the-shelf machine learning machinery. So whatever is available. So people have tried for different methods, starting from generative model, discriminative model, similarity-based measures based on variants of k nearest neighbor is very popular in this domain, and certain meta-learning techniques were also applied, which are applicable for large-scale author classification. Like one of the meta-learning techniques says that the training data is projected into random smaller subspace, and the classification is done, and the process is repeated for t iteration, and the majority and the final decision is taken on the majority voting. Just to get a hang of the problem, we have done a very preliminary experimentation, and we have taken 3 authors. The domain is literature, and the 12 books were taken, and around 2,500 samples were taken. So when you go for intra-book classification, that means certain random pages were taken for the training and the remaining was taken for the test. We got a quite reasonable result. But when you go for inter-book classification, that means one book is taken for training and the other book was taken for testing, the result drops drastically. So it suggests that we have to work a lot more on this. So as a conclusion, we can say the author identification is not merely a document classification, because our job is not to capture the underlying topic but to capture the writing style of the author. So style is a predominant feature in that. So when we talk about other identification method, say speaker identification, where we try to model the vocal tract, maybe handwriting identification also involves certain kind of physical entity. When we talk about the author identification, so it's basically it boils down to the psycholinguistic models. So the kind of word people uses doesn't require any physical intervention, physical entity, doesn't involve any physical entity. It's all the mental lexicon model that people uses, and the kind of word they are going to use next is all depends on the kind of lexicon they have and the kind of process they undergone while learning the language itself. So choice of the words differs on the process in which the language is learned. So our idea is to explore the feature space first, because we have just started to work on this domain. So probably cognitive features, certain cognitive features of the language we are planning to explore. And as far as classification goes, so certain characteristics of the classifier it demands, like insufficient training data, that is very common because we may not get lot of samples for a particular author, and the samples are always quite less than the dimensions of the problem. Then it also requires a efficient multi-class classification, because sometimes the number of classes are more than 50. So one versus rest kind of strategy may not work, and certain kind of inbuilt mechanism or inbuilt formulation for multi-class classification is very much required. Also we want to go for the open set identification. That means in a multi-class scenario, certain examples we want to reject also. So that kind of confidence rejection measure also should be inbuilt in the classifier, and class imbalance problem is also quite common in this particular domain. So these are some of the references.
Any questions? The accuracy numbers that you showed, they were 1 versus odd numbers?
I have used decision tree.
For each?
Yeah, I have used decision tree. So the multiple classification is inbuilt into that. It's not one versus rest. So based on the leaf level we can. So it's already inbuilt.
Okay, let's make this paper again.